Most people don't fail loudly. They fail quietly, slowly, and politely. They don't lose their lives in one bad decision. They lose them in thousands of small, unmanaged moments. An uncontrolled thought, an unnecessary word, a careless financial choice. And then one day they look around and wonder why their life feels small, why respect is missing, why money never stays, why people don't take them seriously, including themselves. This book is not about becoming rich overnight. It's not about positive thinking. It's not about motivation. It's about control. Because before you can control outcomes, opportunities, or your future, you must control three things: your mind, your mouth, your money. Fail at any one of these, and the other two collapse with it. Master them, and average life becomes impossible. Most people never do. That's why most people stay average. Here's the truth most people avoid. Your life does not collapse because of bad luck, bad people, or bad timing. It collapses because your mind is left unmanaged for years. An undisciplined mind is not loud or dramatic at first. It's subtle. It whispers. It rationalizes. It delays. It convinces you that tomorrow is safer than today. And by the time you realize what's happening, momentum is already working against you. Your mind is not a truth machine. That idea alone ruins people. They assume that because a thought appears, it must be valid. Because an emotion feels strong, it must be right. Because an impulse feels urgent, it must be acted on. That assumption is false, and it's deadly. Your mind produces thoughts the same way your lungs produce breath. Automatically, constantly, without asking permission. Some thoughts are useful. Many are garbage. Fear dressed as logic. Laziness disguised as self-care. Ego pretending to be confidence. If you don't learn to separate signal from noise, you'll obey the wrong voice and call it who I am. This is why people sabotage themselves while believing they're being authentic. An uncontrolled mind chases comfort above all else. Comfort feels safe. Comfort feels reasonable. Comfort always has a good excuse. I'll start tomorrow. I'm not in the mood. I deserve a break. It's not the right time. None of these statements are lies. They're incomplete truths. And incomplete truths are more dangerous than obvious lies. Comfort today creates pain tomorrow. Discipline today creates ease later. But the mind is short-sighted. It prioritizes relief now and ignores consequences later. That's why people repeat the same mistakes while swearing they've learned from them. Knowledge isn't the problem. Most people already know what they should do. They know they should sleep better, eat better, focus more, spend less, speak carefully, and stop procrastinating. If information alone changed lives, bookstores would be empty and everyone would be successful. The real issue is control. The disciplined mind does not obey every impulse. It pauses. That pause is everything. In that pause, you gain distance between stimulus and response, between feeling and action, between thought and belief. Without that pause, you are reactive, and reactive people are predictable, manipulable, and weak. A disciplined mind questions itself. Not in a self-destructive way, but in a sober, intelligent way. Is this thought useful? Is this emotion helping me or hijacking me? Will acting on this make my life better next week, next year, or next decade? Most people never ask these questions. They react first and explain later. A trained mind can sit in boredom without panicking. That sounds trivial, but it's rare. Boredom is where most people break. They reach for distraction, noise, scrolling, talking, eating, spending anything to escape stillness. Why? Because stillness forces awareness. Awareness forces accountability. If you can't sit with your own thoughts, that's not a personality trait. That's a warning sign. The disciplined mind can face discomfort without dramatizing it. It understands that discomfort is not danger. Effort is not harm. Resistance is not a sign to quit. It's a signal that growth is happening. Weak minds interpret resistance as a reason to stop. Strong minds interpret it as confirmation they're doing something meaningful. This isn't talent. This isn't genetics. This is training. You train your mind the same way you train your body, through repeated exposure to difficulty without escape. You don't wait until you feel ready. You act despite discomfort. Over time, the mind adapts. What once felt unbearable becomes normal. What once felt hard becomes routine. But here's the part people don't like hearing. If you don't train your mind, it will train you. It will train you to quit early, to avoid effort, to justify weakness, to rationalize mediocrity. And once that training sets in, it becomes your default behavior. If you don't control your thoughts, your emotions will control your actions. That's not philosophy, that's mechanics. Emotions are powerful, fast, and persuasive. Left unchecked, they override logic every time. Anger makes you say things that cost you respect. Fear makes you hesitate until opportunity passes. Desire makes you choose short-term pleasure over long-term gain. And once emotions control your actions, your future becomes chaotic. Inconsistent effort produces inconsistent results. Reactive behavior creates unstable outcomes. You can be intelligent, educated, and well-intentioned and still fail repeatedly if your inner world is ungoverned. This is why some highly intelligent people struggle while less intelligent but more disciplined people quietly win. Discipline compounds. Intelligence without control leaks. Mastering your mind doesn't mean eliminating thoughts or emotions. That's unrealistic. It means not letting them drive the car. You can feel fear and still move forward. Feel anger and still remain silent. Feel temptation and still say no. That is real strength. Your mind is the first battlefield because every other battle is decided there first. Your habits, your words, your money, your reputation, your future, all of it traces back to how well you govern your inner world. Win here, and everything else becomes possible. Lose here, and nothing you build will last. Here's the hard truth most people don't want to hear. Emotions are not your enemy, but obeying them is. People talk about emotions as if they are sacred commands. I felt angry, so I said it. I felt tired, so I stopped. I felt unmotivated, so I waited. That language sounds harmless, even honest. In reality, it's a confession of weakness. It's an admission that something temporary is running something permanent. Emotions are fast. They are loud. They are persuasive. And they are terrible decision makers. An unmanaged emotional life is expensive. It costs people relationships, opportunities, respect, and money. Not because emotions are bad, but because most people never learn to contain them. Anger is a perfect example. Anger itself isn't the problem. The problem is what anger convinces you to do. It narrows your vision. It accelerates your speech. It makes you feel justified while you burn bridges you'll later wish still existed. One emotional outburst can undo years of quiet work. Fear works the same way, just more subtly. Fear doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you to wait, to be cautious, to avoid risk. It disguises itself as being realistic. Meanwhile, opportunities expire while you're still thinking. Desire is even more dangerous because it feels good. Desire convinces you that you deserve now what should be earned later. It pushes you to spend, indulge, speak, and commit without thinking through consequences. Desire is the reason people sabotage long-term goals for short-term relief. Most people don't realize this, but every emotional reaction has a price tag. You might not see it immediately, but it exists. The question isn't whether emotions cost you something. The question is whether you're aware enough to notice when the bill arrives. Emotionally disciplined people aren't cold or robotic. That's a fantasy created by people who don't have control. Disciplined people feel deeply, they just don't hand the steering wheel to every feeling that shows up. They create space between feeling and action. That space is power. In that space, you decide instead of react. You observe instead of explode. You respond instead of regret. Without that space, life becomes a chain reaction of emotional decisions stacked on top of each other, each one creating more mess to clean up later. Here's where most people lie to themselves. They believe their emotions are special, that their anger is justified, that their fear is logical, that their desire is harmless. Everyone believes their emotions make sense. That belief is irrelevant. What matters is whether acting on them moves your life forward or backward. Emotional control doesn't mean suppression. Suppression is when emotions are buried and ignored until they erupt uncontrollably. Control is awareness plus restraint. You acknowledge what you feel, but you don't let it dictate your behavior. This is why emotional discipline is rare. It requires humility. It requires admitting that how you feel is not always aligned with what's best for you. Most people would rather protect their feelings than their future. Emotionally undisciplined people confuse intensity with truth. If a feeling is strong, they assume it must be right. That's a dangerous shortcut. Strong emotions often show up when your ego is threatened, your comfort is challenged, or your identity feels unstable. Those are the exact moments where clarity is needed most and where most people lose it. Think about how many arguments didn't need to happen, how many messages shouldn't have been sent, how many purchases shouldn't have been made. How many decisions would have been better if they were delayed by just 1 hour, 1 night, 1 deep breath? That's the cost of emotional impulsivity. The strongest individuals train themselves to delay response. They don't rush to express everything they feel. They don't need to vent to feel real. They don't need instant relief. They understand that emotions pass, but consequences don't. Emotional control is not built during calm moments. It's built when you're triggered, when you're tired, when you're insulted, when things don't go your way. That's the gym. That's where discipline is either strengthened or exposed as non-existent. If you always lose control when things get difficult, that's not bad luck. That's lack of training. Here's the uncomfortable reality. People who can't manage their emotions are easy to manipulate. Advertisers, social media, toxic individuals, even environments can push emotional buttons and predict your behavior. You become reactive instead of intentional. And reactive people are never in control of their destiny. When you master your emotions, you become stable. Stability creates trust. Trust creates opportunity. Opportunity creates leverage. This is how control compounds quietly over time. A calm person in a chaotic situation has power. A patient person in a rushed environment has advantage. A composed person among emotional people stands out immediately. This isn't about being superior. It's about being effective. If you want consistency in your results, you need consistency in your emotional regulation. You can't build a strong life on emotional randomness. Structure beats intensity. Control beats passion. Awareness beats reaction. Your emotions will always show up. That's human. The question is simple and brutal. Will you acknowledge them or will you obey them? Because every time you obey them blindly, you pay. And over a lifetime, that cost is enormous. Chapter 3. Your mouth reveals your level of control. If someone wants to know how disciplined you really are, they don't need to watch your routine or check your habits. They just need to listen to you talk. Your mouth exposes you faster than anything else. People give away their weakness, insecurity, lack of control, and lack of direction every day through careless speech. They don't notice it because talking feels harmless. It feels natural. It feels like release. But speech is not neutral. Words create consequences, and once they leave your mouth, you don't get to edit them. An uncontrolled mouth is usually a symptom of an uncontrolled mind and unmanaged emotions. When thoughts run wild and emotions are unchecked, speech becomes impulsive. You say what you feel instead of what's necessary. You react instead of choosing. You speak to relieve pressure instead of to produce results. Most people talk too much because silence makes them uncomfortable. Silence forces restraint. Silence forces self-awareness. Talking feels safer because it gives the illusion of control, even when it's actually leaking power. Complaining is the most common example. People complain to feel understood, but all it really does is reinforce helplessness. The more you complain, the more you train your mind to see yourself as a victim of circumstances instead of a manager of choices. Over time, people stop respecting your words because they associate them with weakness, not solutions. Oversharing is another quiet form of self-sabotage. People reveal plans too early, emotions too openly, frustrations too freely. They mistake openness for honesty and vulnerability for strength. In reality, not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Information is leverage. When you give it away without thought, you reduce your own position. A disciplined person understands this instinctively. They don't feel the need to narrate their life. They don't explain themselves excessively. They don't rush to defend their choices. They let time and results do the talking. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is restraint. When you control your mouth, you control your reputation. Every word you speak either increases your credibility or erodes it. People are constantly evaluating you, even when you think they're not. They notice tone, timing, emotional control, consistency. A person who speaks carefully is perceived as thoughtful. A person who speaks emotionally is perceived as unstable, even if they're intelligent. Arguments are where this becomes obvious. Most arguments are not about truth. They're about ego. Someone feels disrespected, unheard, or challenged, and the mouth reacts before the mind can intervene. Voices rise, words sharpen, lines are crossed, and afterward, the damage remains even when emotions cool down. Winning an argument rarely produces long-term victory. Self-control does. Strong individuals don't need to prove they're right in every moment. They understand that preserving respect is often more valuable than winning a point. They choose when to speak and when to let silence do the work. This is why controlled speech is associated with authority. Leaders don't talk constantly, they speak deliberately. Their words are fewer, but heavier. When they do speak, people listen because there's a pattern of restraint behind it. On the other hand, constant talking devalues your voice. If everything is said, nothing stands out. If every thought is expressed, none are refined. If every emotion is spoken, none are respected. Another trap is explaining yourself too much. Excessive explanation is often insecurity in disguise. It signals that you need approval, validation, or understanding to feel stable. Confident people state their position clearly and stop. They don't overjustify. They don't plead to be understood. This doesn't mean being rude or dismissive. It means being precise. Precision in speech is power. Think about how many problems could have been avoided if someone simply stayed quiet. How many relationships strained by unnecessary comments? How many opportunities lost because of careless remarks? How many reputations damaged by jokes that went too far or opinions shared in the wrong room? Speech creates a trail. People remember how you made them feel long after they forget what you actually said. If your words are reactive, sharp, or emotionally unstable, that impression sticks. A disciplined mouth also knows when not to respond. Not every comment deserves a reply. Not every provocation requires defense. Not every opinion needs expression. Restraint confuses people who expect reaction. It also protects you from being pulled into unnecessary conflict. Here's the uncomfortable reality. People who can't control their speech are easy to manipulate. Say the right thing, trigger the right emotion, and they'll talk themselves into trouble. They'll reveal more than they should. They'll escalate situations unnecessarily. They'll lose leverage without realizing it. Controlled speech keeps options open. Once words are spoken, options shrink. Training your mouth means slowing down, thinking before speaking, asking yourself simple questions. Is this necessary? Is this helpful? Is this the right moment? Will this improve the situation or just make me feel better temporarily? Most people never pause long enough to ask. The goal is not to become silent forever. The goal is to become intentional, to speak with purpose instead of impulse, to use words as tools, not emotional outlets. When your mouth is disciplined, people trust you more. They feel safer around you. They take you seriously. They listen when you speak because they know you don't waste words. Control your mouth and you gain something rare, presence. And presence changes how the world responds to you. Chapter 4. Most people talk their future away. Talking feels productive. That's why it's so dangerous. Words give the brain a false sense of movement. When you talk about your goals, your struggles, your plans, or your intentions, your mind registers it as progress even when nothing has actually changed. This is why people can spend years working on themselves without building anything real. Most people don't fail because they lack ambition. They fail because they replace execution with explanation. They talk about what they're going to do. They talk about what they should have done. They talk about what they would do if conditions were better. And talking relieves pressure. It releases tension. It makes you feel seen. But once that pressure is gone, the urgency to act disappears with it. The brain feels rewarded without the work ever happening. This is why announcing goals publicly often backfires. The applause comes early, but the effort doesn't follow. You feel like a builder without laying a single brick. Meanwhile, discipline requires tension, the kind you only feel when no one knows what you're doing, and results are the only way forward. Serious people move quietly because they understand this. They don't announce every intention. They don't narrate every struggle. They protect their energy by keeping it focused on action, not validation. Talking too much about your plans invites opinions you didn't ask for, doubt you didn't need, expectations you weren't ready to carry, and sometimes sabotage disguised as advice. Your future is fragile in its early stages. It needs silence, not noise. Another way people talk their future away is through constant complaining. Complaining feels honest, but it programs helplessness. The more you complain about circumstances, the more your mind looks outward for causes instead of inward for solutions. Over time, this trains you to expect rescue instead of responsibility. People who complain regularly start believing that their life is happening to them, not because of them. That belief quietly kills initiative. There's also a difference between communicating and venting. Communicating seeks solutions. Venting seeks relief. Relief feels good in the moment, but it does nothing to fix the underlying issue. Worse, it strengthens the habit of emotional release instead of disciplined action. Then there's explaining, the endless explaining. People explain themselves when they're unsure of their own authority. They justify choices, over-contextualize decisions, and defend actions that don't require defense. The more you explain, the less confident you sound, even if you're right. Strong people don't feel the need to convince everyone. They know clarity doesn't require volume. They state what matters and move on. A future built on constant explanation is fragile because it depends on approval. The moment approval disappears, so does momentum. Another quiet form of self-sabotage is gossip. Gossip feels harmless because it's social, but gossip trains the mind to focus on other people's lives instead of its own direction. Time spent dissecting others is time stolen from building yourself. People who gossip frequently rarely build anything meaningful. Their attention is pointed outward, not forward. And then there's the habit of talking about problems without committing to solutions. Discussing problems can feel intelligent, it can sound deep. But without action, it's just analysis paralysis disguised as insight. Progress requires silence followed by execution. The people who win long-term are often underestimated early because they don't talk much. They're not loud, they're not constantly branding themselves. They're building quietly while others are busy explaining. Talking creates a sense of identity. Action creates reality. If your mouth is always busy, your hands usually aren't. This doesn't mean you should never speak about your goals or struggles. It means you should be selective, strategic, intentional. Speak to people who can help you execute, not people who just want to listen. Silence protects momentum. The world doesn't need to know what you're about to do. It will notice when it's done. Every word you speak either drains energy or directs it. Most people drain theirs away through endless conversation, debate, justification, and complaint. Then they wonder why they feel stuck. Your future doesn't need more talking. It needs more doing. And until that balance shifts, no amount of ambition will save you from staying exactly where you are. Chapter 5 Money exposes your inner discipline. Money doesn't lie. It doesn't care about your intentions, your intelligence, or your excuses. It simply records your behavior and reflects it back to you with brutal accuracy. People love to blame money problems on income. That's convenient. It protects the ego. But it's rarely the truth. Plenty of high earners are broke. Plenty of average earners are stable. The difference isn't math. It's control. Money is delayed consequence made visible. Every financial outcome you experience today is the result of habits you repeated yesterday. The problem is that money reacts slowly. You can make careless decisions for years before the damage becomes undeniable. And by the time it does, people call it bad luck or the economy instead of what it really is. Undisciplined behavior finally catching up. An uncontrolled person spends emotionally. They spend when they're stressed, bored, insecure, or trying to impress. Money becomes a tool for mood regulation instead of a resource to be managed. The purchase feels small in the moment. The habit is not. Impulse spending is rarely about the item. It's about the feeling, the brief hit of relief, the illusion of progress, the temporary sense of reward. And just like any other impulse, the relief fades quickly, leaving behind less money and the same underlying dissatisfaction. People who lack control don't just overspend, they rationalize it. I deserve this. I work hard. It's not that expensive. Those phrases sound harmless, but repeated often enough, they dismantle financial discipline entirely. Debt is often the end result of this pattern, not because people don't understand interest rates, but because they prioritized emotional comfort over long-term stability. Debt allows desire to outrun discipline. It lets you live a life you haven't earned yet and then forces you to pay for it later with interest. A disciplined person treats money differently, not emotionally, logically, intentionally. They don't ask, "Can I afford this right now?" They ask, "What does this cost me long term?" They understand that money is stored effort, time converted into value. When you waste money, you're wasting hours of your life you already spent. That perspective changes everything. Controlled individuals don't chase appearances. They don't feel pressure to signal success before it exists. They're comfortable looking unimpressive temporarily because they're building something permanent. This is where many people break. They'd rather look successful than become successful, so they spend to maintain an image while quietly eroding their future options. Money reveals patience. People who lack patience struggle financially because wealth requires waiting to spend, waiting to invest, waiting for compounding to work, waiting for the long game to pay off. An impatient mind cannot build lasting wealth. This is why fast money attracts undisciplined people. It promises reward without restraint, speed without structure, and almost always it ends the same way: loss is blamed on circumstances instead of behavior. Financial discipline isn't about being cheap, it's about being deliberate. A disciplined person knows where their money goes, not approximately, exactly. Awareness alone filters out waste. Most people avoid this awareness because it forces accountability. It's easier not to look. But what you don't track, you can't control. And what you can't control will eventually control you. Money also exposes priorities. People claim they value freedom, growth, and stability, then spend most of their income on short-term pleasure. The spending tells the truth, not the words. This isn't about perfection. It's about alignment. Are your financial behaviors aligned with the life you say you want? If not, the gap will eventually punish you. Another hard truth: financial chaos creates mental chaos. Constant money stress drains focus, patience, and emotional stability. It bleeds into relationships, decision-making, and self-respect. When money is out of control, everything else becomes harder. This is why self-control compounds across domains. Control your impulses, and your finances improve. Improve your finances, and your stress decreases. Reduce stress, and your thinking sharpens. Sharper thinking reinforces discipline. The cycle works both ways. People who master money don't worship it, they respect it. They understand that money doesn't create character, it amplifies it. Give money to an undisciplined person and you magnify chaos. Give it to a disciplined one and you multiply stability. The goal isn't obsession with money. The goal is optionality. Control gives you options: time, flexibility, peace. Lack of control takes those away one expense, one impulse, one rationalization at a time. Money is not just a financial test. It's a psychological one. And it never stops testing you. How you handle small amounts predicts how you'll handle large ones. If you can't control spending when the stakes are low, you won't magically gain discipline when they're high. Money is a mirror. Look into it honestly, and it will show you exactly how much control you really have. Chapter 6. Fast pleasure creates slow pain. The most dangerous thing about fast pleasure is not that it feels good, it's that it feels harmless. Fast pleasure rarely announces its cost up front. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't threaten you. It offers relief, comfort, excitement, distraction, all wrapped in convenience. And because the damage is delayed, the mind learns the wrong lesson. This is safe. That's how people ruin themselves without noticing. Fast pleasure is anything that gives you immediate reward with little or no effort. Endless scrolling, junk food, porn, cheap entertainment, impulse spending, constant talking, emotional venting. Avoiding difficult conversations, quitting when things get uncomfortable. These behaviors feel small in isolation. Together, they quietly dismantle discipline. Slow pain is the bill, and it always arrives later. People assume discipline is about willpower. That's shallow thinking. Discipline is about pattern recognition. It's about understanding that what feels good now often steals from you later, and what feels uncomfortable now often pays you back with interest. Modern life is engineered to weaken this understanding. Everything is optimized for speed, ease, and stimulation. You can eat without effort, watch without thinking, buy without saving, speak without consequence, distract yourself without limits. The environment constantly pulls you toward the path of least resistance, and resistance is where strength is built. This is why so many people feel restless, anxious, unfocused, and dissatisfied even when their lives are relatively comfortable. Their nervous systems are overloaded with stimulation but starved of meaning. Pleasure is abundant. Fulfillment is rare. Fast pleasure trains the brain to expect reward without effort. Over time, effort starts to feel unbearable. Focus feels painful. Silence feels threatening. Discipline feels unnatural. The person hasn't become weak, they've been conditioned. This conditioning is subtle. It happens daily, through repetition. Every time you choose the easy escape instead of the hard task, you reinforce the pattern. The brain adapts quickly. What once felt optional becomes necessary. What once felt indulgent becomes routine. And when discomfort finally arrives, as it always does, the mind has no tolerance for it. That's when people panic. They burn out. They quit. They lash out. They numb themselves further. They double down on the very behaviors that caused the weakness in the first place. Fast pleasure doesn't destroy you in one dramatic moment. It erodes you quietly. People often misunderstand delayed gratification. They think it means living joyless, restricted lives. That's not discipline. That's ignorance. True discipline is not about denying pleasure forever. It's about choosing the right timing for it. A disciplined person understands trade-offs. They delay gratification not because they hate pleasure, but because they value freedom more. Freedom from debt, freedom from dependency, freedom from compulsive behavior, freedom from being controlled by impulses. The average person delays responsibility instead. They push it off. They postpone it. They negotiate with it. I'll deal with this later. Later becomes never. And responsibility, when ignored, becomes heavier with time. Slow pain is the result of accumulated avoidance. Unmanaged health doesn't hurt much at first, then it hurts constantly. Unmanaged finances don't collapse immediately, then they suffocate you. Unmanaged emotions don't explode right away, then they ruin relationships. Unmanaged time doesn't feel dangerous, then years disappear. Slow pain is patient. It waits. Fast pleasure makes you short-sighted. It shrinks your time horizon. You start making decisions based on how you feel right now instead of where those decisions will put you later. This is why intelligent people still make terrible choices. Intelligence doesn't protect you from impulsivity. Discipline does. The brain always asks one question first. How do I feel? Discipline asks a better one. What does this lead to? That difference determines outcomes. Another trap of fast pleasure is identity erosion. When you constantly give in to impulses, you teach yourself something dangerous. I can't be trusted. Over time, self-respect erodes. Confidence weakens. You stop believing your own promises. You stop setting serious goals because you know you won't follow through. That internal loss of trust is devastating. It's why people feel disconnected from themselves. Why motivation feels fake. Why ambition turns into frustration. They're not lazy. They're disappointed in themselves. Discipline restores self-trust. Every small act of restraint sends a signal. I'm in control. Those signals compound. Confidence grows quietly. Not because you tell yourself affirmations, but because your behavior proves it. Fast pleasure also numbs sensitivity. When stimulation is constant, ordinary experiences lose impact. Focus weakens. Satisfaction shortens. You need more to feel less. That's how dependency forms not just on substances, but on behaviors. This is why boredom is such an important training ground. Boredom forces the brain to recalibrate, to slow down, to tolerate stillness. People who can't handle boredom are easy prey for distraction. People who can handle boredom can handle discipline. A disciplined person doesn't eliminate pleasure. They earn it. They place it intentionally. They don't let it bleed into every moment. Pleasure becomes a reward, not a default state. This is also why structure matters. Structure limits choice, and fewer choices reduce impulsive behavior. When everything is flexible, discipline collapses. When some things are fixed, control becomes easier. Fast pleasure thrives in chaos. Discipline thrives in structure. You don't need extreme rules. You need clear boundaries. Boundaries around time, spending, speech, consumption, and energy. Without boundaries, impulses roam freely. With boundaries, impulses weaken. People often say, "I'll be disciplined once I feel motivated." That's backward. Motivation follows discipline, not the other way around. Waiting to feel ready is how people stay stuck for years. Discipline is a decision repeated daily, especially when you don't feel like it. The uncomfortable truth is this: most people already know which pleasures are costing them. They just don't want to give them up. They prefer slow pain later over discomfort now. That choice feels rational in the moment. It never is. Life doesn't punish people for enjoying pleasure. It punishes people for letting pleasure run their lives. If you always choose what feels good now, you will eventually be forced to endure what feels bad later. If you willingly endure what's hard now, life becomes lighter over time. That is the trade. Fast pleasure creates dependency. Discipline creates independence. And independence, real independence, is worth more than any momentary comfort you're afraid to let go of. The question isn't whether you'll experience pain. You will. The question is when, and on whose terms. Choose slow discipline now, or accept slow pain later. There is no third option. Chapter 7. Control is built in boring moments. Most people misunderstand discipline because they imagine it as something dramatic. They picture a turning point, a surge of motivation, a powerful moment where everything clicks and life changes. That fantasy is comforting and completely wrong. Discipline is built in moments so boring that most people refuse to stay in them. No applause. No urgency. No emotional payoff. Just repetition. Control is not forged when life is intense. It's forged when life is quiet and nothing is forcing you to behave well. That's when your real habits surface. That's when excuses sound reasonable. That's when quitting feels harmless. Boring moments are where the truth lives. Anyone can act disciplined during a crisis. Fear creates focus. Pressure creates urgency. Deadlines create action. That's not control. That's survival. Control is what you do when nothing is at stake right now. When no one is watching. When no one will notice if you slack. When there's no immediate consequence for choosing comfort. That's where most people fail. They associate boredom with stagnation. They interpret lack of stimulation as a sign they're wasting time. So they seek distraction, noise, entertainment, conversation, anything to feel movement. But boredom is not emptiness. Boredom is space. And space is where discipline grows. Repetition without excitement is the price of mastery. The gym session where nothing remarkable happens. The workday where progress feels invisible. The savings deposited with no celebration. The silence maintained instead of reacting. These moments don't feel meaningful, but they are cumulative. Average people avoid boring consistency because it doesn't feed the ego. There's nothing to post, nothing to announce. Nothing to point at and say, "Look at me." So they jump from one intense moment to another, mistaking stimulation for progress. That's why their lives feel busy but go nowhere. Controlled individuals understand a truth most people resist. The unglamorous work is the work. They don't need constant feedback. They don't need motivation speeches. They don't need emotional highs to function. They trust the process because they've seen what consistency produces over time. Boredom is also where temptation shows up. When nothing urgent is happening, impulses get louder. The urge to check, to scroll, to snack, to talk, to escape. The mind searches for stimulation because it has been trained to expect it. If you always give in during these moments, you train yourself to be dependent on distraction. You become someone who cannot sit still, cannot focus, cannot endure silence. That weakness eventually bleeds into every area of life. If you can sit through boredom without escaping, you gain something rare: mental stamina. Mental stamina is the ability to stay engaged without emotional reward, to keep going without encouragement, to do what needs to be done simply because it needs to be done. This is why boring routines are powerful. They remove decision-making. They reduce emotional interference. They turn discipline into default behavior. People often say they want freedom, but they resist structure. That's backwards. Structure creates freedom. When your routine is solid, your mind is lighter. You don't negotiate with yourself constantly. You don't waste energy deciding what to do next. Chows feels exciting. Structure feels dull. Chows also collapses. Structure compounds. Another uncomfortable truth. Boredom exposes who you really are. When distractions are removed, you're left with your thoughts, your restlessness, your impatience, your discomfort. Many people don't like what they find there, so they stay busy instead of becoming better. But avoiding boredom is avoiding growth. Boring moments are also where discipline becomes identity. When you consistently do the right thing without drama, it stops feeling heroic and starts feeling normal. That's the goal. Discipline that feels normal doesn't require motivation. Motivation is unreliable. It spikes and crashes. Identity is stable. When you identify as someone who shows up, who finishes, who doesn't overreact, who saves, who stays quiet when necessary behavior follows naturally, you don't need to hype yourself up. You just act in alignment with who you believe you are. That identity is built quietly through repetition no one applauds. Most people quit here because progress feels invisible. They don't feel different fast enough. They don't see results immediately. They assume nothing is happening and abandon the process right before it starts paying off. This is where discipline separates people permanently. Those who stay consistent during boring stretches eventually reach a tipping point. Results appear suddenly, but they were built slowly. Outsiders call it luck. Insiders know it was boredom endured repeatedly. Boredom also sharpens awareness. When noise is removed, patterns become visible. You notice where you waste time, where you avoid effort, where you react emotionally. That awareness is uncomfortable and essential. People who constantly distract themselves never see their own patterns clearly. They live on autopilot, repeating the same mistakes while wondering why nothing changes. Control requires consciousness. Consciousness requires stillness. This is why silence, routine, and repetition are not enemies of growth. They are prerequisites. If you can master boring moments, you can master pressure. If you can stay disciplined when nothing is happening, you'll be unstoppable when something is. Most people chase intensity. Disciplined people build endurance. And endurance wins. Not because it's impressive, but because it lasts. Control isn't built when life demands it. It's built when life doesn't. And that's exactly why most people never develop it. Chapter 8 environment can weaken or sharpen you. One of the most comforting lies people tell themselves is this: if I were more disciplined, my environment wouldn't matter. That's fantasy, and it's dangerous. Your environment is not neutral. It is training you every single day, whether you're aware of it or not. People love to talk about willpower because it flatters the ego. It suggests that success is about inner strength alone. In reality, willpower is fragile. It drains. It fluctuates. And when it's forced to fight your environment constantly, it loses. This is why intelligent, motivated people still fail. Not because they're weak, but because they're swimming against a current they refuse to acknowledge. Your environment shapes your defaults. What you see, what you hear, what's easy, what's tempting, what's normal. Over time, those defaults become habits, and habits become identity. If distraction is everywhere, focus becomes rare. If indulgence is normalized, restraint feels extreme. If chaos surrounds you, calm feels unnatural. And most people never stop to ask why discipline feels so hard, they just blame themselves. Look closely at your surroundings, not just the physical space, but the social and digital one too. What behaviors are rewarded? What habits are encouraged? What attitudes are tolerated? If laziness is joked about, it spreads. If complaining is common, it multiplies. If impulse spending is celebrated, restraint feels lonely. Humans adapt quickly to whatever is normalized around them. This is why environment beats intention so often. People say they want to wake up early but sleep with their phone next to their head. They say they want to save money but surround themselves with people who spend impulsively. They say they want peace but stay in loud, reactive spaces. Then they wonder why discipline feels exhausting. It's because they're trying to build control in an environment designed to erode it. Strong individuals don't rely on constant self-control. They design their environment to make discipline easier and weakness harder. They reduce friction for good habits and increase friction for bad ones. They don't test themselves unnecessarily. This is a crucial difference between disciplined people and average ones. Average people try to resist temptation endlessly. Disciplined people remove temptation whenever possible. They don't argue with their impulses. They outmaneuver them. If junk food isn't in your house, discipline is easy. If notifications are muted, focus is easier. If your schedule is structured, procrastination weakens. This isn't weakness, it's intelligence. Another overlooked aspect of environment is people. The people around you shape your standards, not through advice, but through behavior. You subconsciously calibrate what's acceptable by observing what's common. If everyone around you talks constantly, silence feels awkward. If everyone around you complains, responsibility feels heavy. If everyone around you avoids effort, effort feels unnecessary. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You sink to the level of your environment. This doesn't mean you abandon everyone who's different from you. It means you're honest about influence. Proximity matters, repetition matters, exposure matters. If you spend time with people who lack control, you will constantly have to fight normalization. Their habits will start to feel reasonable. Their excuses will sound familiar. Their mediocrity will feel justified. And slowly, without noticing, your standards drop. This is why high-control individuals are selective with their company. Not arrogant, selective. They understand that discipline is hard enough without constantly being pulled backward. They also understand that environment includes information. What you consume mentally shapes how you think. Endless news, outrage cycles, gossip, and comparison distort perception. They keep your nervous system reactive and your attention fragmented. A reactive mind struggles with discipline. Calm environments create calm decisions. Chaotic environments create impulsive ones. This is why silence is so powerful. Silence reduces stimulation. Reduced stimulation sharpens awareness. Sharper awareness strengthens control. People who fear silence usually fear what they'll notice when noise disappears. Environment also determines how quickly bad habits take hold. In a permissive environment, weakness spreads fast. In a structured environment, discipline becomes contagious. If you place a disciplined person in a chaotic environment long enough, they'll struggle. If you place an undisciplined person in a disciplined environment long enough, they'll improve. Not because of motivation, but because behavior adapts. This is why routines matter. Routines are environmental structure over time. They reduce decision fatigue. They make discipline automatic. They free mental energy for what actually matters. When everything is optional, nothing is consistent. Most people want freedom without structure. What they get instead is chaos. Structure doesn't imprison you. It stabilizes you. Another mistake people make is believing they can outgrow bad environments later. They stay in places that drain them, surround themselves with habits that weaken them, and promise themselves they'll fix it once they're stronger. That strength never arrives because the environment keeps undoing it. If your environment is constantly eroding your discipline, it's not a test of character to endure it. It's poor strategy. You don't prove strength by staying in places that weaken you. You prove intelligence by leaving or redesigning them. High-control individuals take responsibility for their surroundings. They don't complain endlessly about how distracting, tempting, or toxic things are. They change what they can and distance themselves from what they can't. This doesn't require dramatic moves. Small adjustments compound. One less distraction, one better habit made easier, one toxic influence reduced. Over time, the environment starts working for you instead of against you. And when your environment supports discipline, control stops feeling like a daily battle. It becomes your default. This is the quiet advantage disciplined people have, not superior willpower, superior setup. They understand a simple truth most people ignore. If your environment is designed for weakness, discipline will always feel exhausting. If your environment is designed for strength, discipline becomes sustainable. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer obstacles. And that begins with taking your environment seriously because it's already shaping you, whether you like it or not. Chapter 9 Average is a choice made daily. No one wakes up one day and decides to live an average life. That's not how it happens. Average is not a dramatic failure. It's a slow agreement. A series of small decisions that feel reasonable in isolation and disastrous in accumulation. People drift into average because it requires no resistance. Average thinking is comfortable. It doesn't challenge assumptions. It accepts norms without questioning them. It follows patterns because they're familiar, not because they're effective. When something doesn't work, average thinking looks for explanations instead of adjustments. Average behavior avoids extremes, not because extremes are wrong, but because standing out feels risky. Average people prefer blending in. They mistake safety for wisdom. They confuse conformity with stability. The truth is brutal. Average is the path of least friction. That's why it's crowded. Most people make average choices in moments that feel insignificant. They sleep in a little longer. They speak when silence would have been smarter. They spend for comfort instead of saving for freedom. They avoid difficult conversations. They delay uncomfortable work. None of these choices seem life-altering in the moment, but repeated daily, they define a trajectory. Trajectory matters more than intensity. A few disciplined decisions repeated consistently will outperform occasional bursts of effort every time. Average people rely on motivation. Disciplined people rely on systems. Motivation fades. Systems endure. Average also thrives on comparison. Instead of measuring themselves against their potential, people measure themselves against others who are also stuck. At least I'm doing better than them. That mindset creates a low ceiling. It replaces ambition with justification. When you compare downward, you shrink. High performers compare upward or inward. They ask a different question. Am I doing what I know I'm capable of? That question is uncomfortable, so most people avoid it. Average life feels busy but unfulfilling. There's constant movement but little progress. People confuse activity with advancement. They fill their days with tasks that maintain the status quo instead of actions that change it. Another feature of average is emotional decision-making. Average people decide based on how they feel in the moment. If they're tired, they stop. If they're frustrated, they react. If they're bored, they escape. Their lives swing with their moods. Controlled people decide based on principle. Feelings are acknowledged, not obeyed. This creates stability. Stability creates momentum. Momentum creates results. Average is also reinforced socially. When someone chooses discipline, silence, restraint, or long-term thinking, it often makes others uncomfortable. It challenges their own choices. So they mock it, downplay it, call it extreme. This social pressure quietly pulls people back toward the center. Standing above average requires tolerance for misunderstanding. You will be called boring, too serious, too quiet, too intense, too focused. Those labels are attempts to normalize mediocrity by shaming discipline. Most people surrender here because belonging feels safer than excellence. But average is expensive. It costs you options. It limits freedom. It stretches effort thin over a long period with little return. You work, but never quite get ahead. You try, but never quite break through. This creates a dangerous psychological state, resignation. People tell themselves they're being realistic, but what they're really doing is adjusting expectations downward to reduce disappointment. That's how dreams quietly die without drama. Above-average lives are not built on extreme sacrifice. They're built on consistent refusal. Refusal to indulge every impulse. Refusal to speak unnecessarily. Refusal to spend carelessly. Refusal to drift. Small refusals, repeated daily, create separation. The difference between average and exceptional is rarely talent. It's tolerance for discomfort. Exceptional people are willing to feel awkward longer, to stay patient longer, to work quietly longer, to delay rewards longer. Average people want proof before commitment. Exceptional people commit before proof. This is why average stays average. It waits for certainty in a world that rewards initiative. Average also avoids responsibility by blaming external factors: the economy, the system, other people, circumstances. While these factors matter, focusing on them doesn't create leverage. Responsibility does. Taking responsibility is uncomfortable because it removes excuses, but it's also empowering because it restores agency. You can't control outcomes fully. You can control choices. And choices, compounded, shape outcomes more than luck ever will. Choosing above average doesn't require a dramatic overhaul. It requires daily honesty. Honest assessment of where your time goes. Honest evaluation of how you speak. Honest reflection on how you spend money. Honest recognition of emotional patterns. Most people avoid honesty because it demands change. Average life is not evil. It's just limited. And limits become cages when you outgrow them. The problem is not being average today. The problem is choosing it again tomorrow. Every day you wake up, you're offered the same decision: comfort or control, convenience or discipline, drift or direction. No one will stop you from choosing average. Society is built to support it. No alarms go off, no warnings appear. You're praised for fitting in and staying manageable. But the cost shows up later, in regret, in frustration, in the quiet realization that you played small when you didn't have to. Average is not an accident. It's a decision repeated so often it starts to feel like destiny. And destiny, in this case, is self-chosen. Chapter 10. Self-control is the real power. Most people misunderstand power because they look for it outside themselves. They think power is status, money, dominance, influence, or being feared. Those are effects. They are not the source. The source is something far quieter and far more difficult: self-control. A person who cannot control themselves will never control outcomes for long. They might rise temporarily, but they will leak power through emotion, impulse, ego, or excess. Every external advantage becomes unstable when the inner foundation is weak. Self-control is not flashy. That's why it's underestimated. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It simply makes everything else work better. When you control yourself, you stop being predictable. Predictable people are easy to manipulate. Push the right button and they react. Offer the right temptation and they fold. Trigger the right emotion and they reveal themselves. That's not power, that's exposure. Self-controlled people are different. They pause, they observe. They don't rush to respond. They don't give instant access to their emotions. This creates uncertainty around them, and uncertainty creates leverage. A calm person in a tense situation has power. A patient person in a rushed environment has power. A restrained person among impulsive people has power. Because power is not volume, it's command over response. Most people surrender control without realizing it. They let moods dictate behavior. They let cravings dictate choices. They let anger dictate speech. They let fear dictate timing. Then they wonder why life feels unstable. Stability is a byproduct of self-control. When your reactions are consistent, people trust you. When your behavior is measured, people respect you. When your decisions are deliberate, people follow you. None of this requires dominance. It requires reliability. This is why self-control compounds across every area of life. Control your mind, and your focus improves. Control your emotions, and your decisions stabilize. Control your mouth, and your reputation strengthens. Control your money, and your options expand. Each form of control reinforces the others. Lose control in one area, and pressure spills into the rest. People often chase confidence without realizing confidence is not a feeling, it's evidence. It's built when you repeatedly keep promises to yourself, when you say no and mean it, when you delay gratification and survive the discomfort, when you act in alignment with long-term values instead of short-term relief. That's why self-control builds quiet confidence. Not the loud, performative kind, the grounded kind, the kind that doesn't need validation. A self-controlled person doesn't need to prove anything. That alone is power. There's another uncomfortable truth. Freedom without control becomes chaos. People say they want freedom, but what they really want is escape from responsibility. True freedom is the ability to choose wisely, not endlessly. Without self-control, freedom turns into indulgence. Indulgence turns into dependency. Dependency turns into limitation, and limitation feels like a trap. Self-control prevents that cycle. It keeps pleasure from becoming addiction, comfort from becoming stagnation, confidence from becoming arrogance. This is why people with discipline age better psychologically. They don't panic when things slow down. They don't crumble under pressure. They don't chase every new distraction. Their sense of self is not fragile. They have internal order. Internal order creates external clarity. Self-control also protects you from regret. Regret is not caused by failure alone. It's caused by betraying your own standards, knowing what you should have done and choosing not to do it, saying what you knew you shouldn't have said, spending what you knew you shouldn't have spent. Over time, those betrayals accumulate and harden into bitterness. Self-control keeps your future self clean. It minimizes damage. It reduces apology. It preserves dignity. This doesn't mean perfection. It means direction. A self-controlled person still fails, but their failures are smaller, cleaner, and corrective, not catastrophic. They recover faster because they didn't burn everything down emotionally. People without self-control often confuse intensity with strength. They're loud, reactive, expressive, impulsive. It looks powerful on the surface. It isn't. It's volatility. And volatility always self-destructs eventually. The strongest people are often underestimated because they don't broadcast effort. They don't dramatize struggle. They don't announce discipline. They just live it. And over time, results stack quietly in their favor. Self-control is not about becoming rigid or cold. It's about becoming intentional, choosing when to act, when to speak, when to spend, when to wait. That selectivity multiplies impact. When you stop reacting to everything, everything starts reacting to you. That's real power. Not power over others, power over outcome. And once you experience that level of control, you realize something important. You no longer need to chase power. You already have it. Chapter 9. Average is a choice made daily. Average is not a sentence handed to you by life. It is a pattern you agree to, one decision at a time. No one plans to become average. People plan to be comfortable, to avoid conflict, to stay safe, to not push too hard. Average is what those plans quietly produce. The danger of average is not that it's miserable, it's that it's tolerable. You can survive in it. You can function in it. You can distract yourself inside it. That's why people stay. Pain would force change. Comfort sedates ambition. Average choices are subtle. They rarely feel like failure in the moment. They feel reasonable, justifiable, even mature. Skipping effort today doesn't feel destructive. Speaking when silence would be wiser doesn't feel costly. Spending a little more than you should doesn't feel dangerous. Delaying uncomfortable action doesn't feel fatal. But average is not built in moments of crisis. It's built in moments of permission when you allow yourself to drift because the cost isn't immediate. This is where people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline is about big sacrifices. It's not. It's about small refusals, refusing to take the easy option when the harder one is clearly better. Refusing to let mood dictate behavior. Refusing to outsource responsibility to circumstance. Average people make decisions based on how they feel today. Controlled people make decisions based on where they want to be tomorrow. That single difference compounds faster than most people realize. Average thinking also loves excuses dressed as realism. This is just how things are. People like me don't get ahead. I'm doing fine compared to others. These statements feel grounded. They're not. They're ceilings. The most dangerous comparison is downward comparison. When you measure yourself against people who are doing worse, you give yourself permission to stay small. Growth requires comparison to standards, not to struggling peers. Average environments reward sameness. When someone starts to outgrow the group, discomfort appears, not because growth is wrong, but because it disrupts the unspoken agreement to stay where everyone is. That discomfort is usually handled through jokes, criticism, or subtle discouragement. Relax. You're doing too much. Why are you so serious? Those phrases aren't advice. They're pressure to conform. Above-average paths require tolerance for social friction. You will be misunderstood. You will be underestimated. You will sometimes be alone in your standards. Most people retreat here because belonging feels safer than progress. Average life also thrives on busyness. Busy schedules, busy conversations, busy distractions. Activity becomes a substitute for advancement. People exhaust themselves maintaining a life instead of improving it. Progress feels slow because it requires focus. Focus requires saying no. Saying no makes people uncomfortable, including yourself. Average avoids that discomfort. Another feature of average is emotional volatility. Average people are ruled by how the day feels. If energy is low, effort stops. If emotions are high, control disappears. Their output fluctuates constantly, which means results never stabilize. Controlled people accept that consistency matters more than intensity. They don't need to feel good to act correctly. They don't need perfect conditions to move forward. They understand that discipline is not about feeling ready, it's about being reliable. Average people wait to feel ready. And readiness, conveniently, never arrives. There's also a hidden arrogance in average thinking, the belief that time will somehow fix what discipline avoids, that things will work out without deliberate action. That potential will eventually convert itself into reality. Potential does not convert itself, it expires. Every year spent drifting reduces optionality. Choices narrow, responsibilities increase, risk tolerance drops. What once could have been changed easily now requires sacrifice. Average feels cheap early and expensive later. This is why regret is so common. Not because people failed, but because they didn't choose. They let years decide for them. Above-average lives are built intentionally, not perfectly intentionally, with awareness, with standards, with repeated alignment between values and behavior. That alignment is uncomfortable at first. It forces you to confront where you're inconsistent, where you've been negotiating with yourself, where you've been pretending effort is optional. Most people don't want that confrontation, so they stay average and call it balance. Balance without direction is stagnation. Choosing above average doesn't mean obsession or burnout. It means clarity, knowing what matters and protecting it daily. It means understanding that comfort is not the goal, capability is. Capability gives you choices. Average takes them away quietly. Every day, you are voting for the kind of life you will live. Not with words, with actions, with restraint, with silence, with effort, with discipline. Average wins when you don't vote. And the longer you abstain, the harder it becomes to change the result. Average is not imposed on you. It's selected repeatedly until it feels permanent. The moment you understand that, responsibility returns to where it belongs, and so does the possibility of more. Chapter 10. Self-control is the real power. Most people spend their lives chasing power without realizing they are avoiding the only kind that actually matters. They chase authority, money, influence, validation, status, attention. They want control over circumstances, over people, over outcomes. And even when they get a taste of it, it never holds. Something always slips. Something always collapses. Something always exposes them. That's because external power without internal control is unstable. Self-control is not impressive at first glance. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't intimidate. It doesn't trend. But it quietly determines who wins in the long run and who eventually self-destructs. A person who cannot control themselves will always be controlled by something else. Mood, impulse, fear, desire, ego, pressure, and anything that can control you can be used against you. This is why self-control is real power. It makes you difficult to manipulate. When you don't react emotionally on cue, people lose leverage. When you don't need instant gratification, systems lose control over you. When you don't chase validation, opinions lose their grip. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest one. It's the calm one who doesn't rush, doesn't explain, doesn't overreact, and doesn't need approval. That person chooses instead of reacts. Self-control begins with response. Life constantly provokes you, delays you, disrespects you, tempts you, distracts you. None of that ever stops. The only question is whether you respond deliberately or impulsively. Most people respond reflexively. They feel, then act. That sequence guarantees regret. Controlled people feel, pause, evaluate, then act. That pause is the difference between chaos and command. Power lives in the pause. When you control your reactions, you control your trajectory. You stop making decisions that feel good for 5 minutes and cost you 5 years. You stop burning bridges you'll later wish you still had. You stop leaking energy into situations that don't deserve it. Self-control also creates predictability in yourself, which creates stability in your life. You become someone who finishes what they start, someone whose word means something, someone who doesn't self-sabotage under pressure. That reliability compounds faster than talent ever will. This is why disciplined people often outperform more gifted ones. Talent without control is unreliable. Discipline makes average abilities dangerous over time. Another uncomfortable truth: people who lack self-control often mistake intensity for strength. They're emotional, expressive, reactive, impulsive. It looks powerful because it's loud, but it's unstable, and instability always collapses. Self-control looks quiet because it doesn't need to prove itself. There is also a deep psychological benefit to control that most people overlook: self-respect. Every time you give in to an impulse you know you shouldn't, you lose trust in yourself. Every broken promise to yourself weakens your identity. Over time, confidence erodes not because life is hard, but because you stopped believing your own commitments. Self-control restores that trust. When you say no and mean it, something inside you strengthens. When you delay gratification and survive the discomfort, confidence grows. When you act according to principle instead of emotion, your self-image stabilizes. That inner stability is priceless. It makes you harder to shake, harder to derail, harder to intimidate. Self-control also protects your future self. Most regret doesn't come from what you didn't achieve. It comes from what you did impulsively, words said. Money wasted, time lost. Opportunities sabotaged by emotion. Discipline minimizes damage. It doesn't eliminate mistakes, but it prevents catastrophes. Your failures become lessons instead of life sentences. This is why self-controlled people recover faster. They don't spiral. They don't explode. They don't destroy everything when things go wrong. They adjust and continue. That adaptability is power. People often say they want freedom, but freedom without self-control becomes slavery to impulse. Endless options without restraint lead to excess, burnout, addiction, and regret. True freedom is not doing whatever you want. It's being able to choose what's best even when it's uncomfortable. Self-control gives you that freedom. It allows you to enjoy pleasure without being owned by it, to experience emotion without being ruled by it, to pursue ambition without being blinded by ego. When you master yourself, you don't need to dominate others. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need constant stimulation or reassurance. You become centered. Centered people don't panic under pressure. They don't chase every opportunity. They don't react to every insult. They don't crumble when plans change. That composure gives them an edge in every arena: personal, professional, financial, and psychological. Over time, the world starts responding differently to you. People trust you more, take you more seriously, feel safer around you. Opportunities come not because you demanded them, but because your behavior signaled reliability. This is the quiet reward of self-control. And here's the final truth most people never fully accept. Self-control is not restrictive, it's liberating. It frees you from dependency. It frees you from regret. It frees you from chaos. It gives you options when others feel trapped, calm when others panic, direction when others drift. You don't need more motivation. You don't need more information. You don't need more confidence. You need control. Because when you control your mind, your mouth, and your money, you stop living reactively. And when you stop living reactively, life stops controlling you. That is real power. And once you have it, you realize something quietly dangerous. You were never weak. You were just undisciplined. Fix that, and everything else follows. At the end of all the thinking, planning, learning, and talking, life comes down to one thing: who is in control? Not who is the smartest. Not who had the best opportunities. Not who started ahead. Who is in control? If you don't control your mind, it will chase comfort and call it logic. If you don't control your mouth, it will leak power and call it honesty. If you don't control your money, it will disappear and call it necessity. Nothing in this book is extreme. It's simply honest. Most people don't fail because life is unfair. They fail because they never took command of themselves. They lived reactively, spoke impulsively, spent emotionally, and waited for conditions to change instead of changing their behavior. Control is not about becoming rigid or joyless. It's about becoming deliberate, choosing when to act instead of reacting to everything, choosing silence over noise, patience over impulse, structure over chaos. Once you develop control, life becomes quieter, not because problems disappear, but because you stop amplifying them with emotion and impulse. You respond instead of explode. You plan instead of drift. You build instead of cope. This is how average is escaped, not through motivation, but through mastery. You will not wake up one day feeling suddenly disciplined. Discipline is not a mood, it's a pattern, a series of small, often uncomfortable decisions made consistently. No one will congratulate you for it. No one will remind you to keep going. No one will stop you from quitting. That's why control is rare, but it's also why it's powerful. Because once you have it, you don't need to chase confidence, respect, or stability. They follow naturally. Your life becomes aligned. Your actions start matching your intentions. And the chaos that once felt inevitable begins to fade. You don't need to control the world. You don't need to control other people. Control yourself. If you do that, you will never be average again.